Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Feds, where we love to talk about government corruption and solutions to end it. I am Stephanie Weidle. Before we begin, please hop on over to our Rumble and YouTube channels, to Spotify and Apple, and like this episode. Comment where you can and share. That's how we're getting the word out about this platform. Our website is fedsforfreedom.org, where you can learn more about our mission and donate so we can keep this podcast going. We have a unique opportunity to talk with someone whose past strategic work is very relevant and valuable. Honorable Scot Faulkner is a consultant, author, and activist whose business-based reforms rebuilt the integrity of the U.S. House of Representatives operations, generating a cumulative savings of $5.5+ billion. Scott became the first chief administrative officer of the U.S. House of Representatives. These reforms became the operational model for 44 national parliaments and were named one of the top 100 innovations in American government by the Ford Foundation and Harvard University. He served in the Reagan administration and has a list of national and international accomplishments. And today I get to sit down with him. Scott, thank you so much for coming into the studio. It's great to see you. So you were the personnel arm of DOGE during the Reagan administration and throughout the 80s. Your job was to drain the swamp of the Carter administration.
Exactly.
How did you get into that role?
Well, I was working for John Ashbrook of Ohio, which people may remember. He ran actually against Nixon in '72 as the conservative, and he was the most conservative member of Congress. He was actually the head of the American Conservative Union and the National Rifle Association at the time, and I was his chief legislative assistant in charge of helping him with all of his amendments and also all the parliamentary activity. But the most important thing, which led me into the Reagan years, was that we created a personnel system network to bring young people into House offices. And so there was the Heritage Foundation and then myself coordinating with this Republican Study Committee. So we had this huge resume bank. And then Morton Blackwell was actually on the Senate side doing the same thing. So as we moved into the summer of '80, I was one of the liaisons at the Detroit Convention dealing with the congressional side of the House. And Lee Atwater and a number of other people came up to me and said, "We know you are astride a lot of resumes. Can you pull together 900 people in the next 60 days?" And I said, yes. And so I got pulled into the Reagan campaign as the director of personnel, creating that 900-person operation. And then in mid-September of '80, our internal tracking polls showed that Reagan was going to win by a fairly healthy margin. And so I was then pulled into transition planning. And again, looking at that time, 2,200 people coming into the transition for all the different transition teams. And each of the transition teams were looking at policy, programs, but also personnel. So I with my team, became the repository and curator of all the personnel data being collected during the transition, and then moved into the White House in presidential personnel as the clearance officer to not only help basically clear people in, but most importantly, clear people out.
Right. So clearing people in is its own deal. Mm-hmm. But clearing people out is a whole lot harder.
Very much so.
How did you do it? What was your plan?
Our plan was, first of all, we had a unique situation because the 1978 Personnel Reform Act had been passed and implemented, which created the Senior Executive Service, which was all of these at the time. They were called super grades, which are people, again, to start using jargon, the general services schedule went up through 15, but then you actually had 16, 17, 18s, and 19s and 20s at that time. And so they said, we're going to create this, again, the legislation, create this elite corps of executives who could move around between agencies. Of course, that never happened. But what it did happen was saying, okay, we're going to hold them to higher accountability, deliverables. Again, that didn't happen either.
No, that did not happen.
But what it did do is Carter's people who were at political levels careered in and said, okay, as part of this implementation of this 1978 law, we're going to all become career people. We called them submarines at the time. And they were under their 1-year probationary period. So we would literally had a countdown clock for every one of these people to say March of 81, July of 81, they are going to leave their probationary period, and therefore it'd be harder to dig them out. So we literally went around, my team and I were like a welcome wagon to all the different cabinet secretaries and agency heads, and literally would present them with this list of people saying, Fred needs to be gone by April, Sally by June, John by August or whatever. And then the other part was we started to realize that in addition to the regular politicals and the careers that were submarining, there had already been other career people who'd been elevated in different ways. And basically every administration goes in and tries to find friendlies within the career ranks. And so those people get moved up to be the inner circle around the secretary, the assistant secretaries, or agency directors or whatever. And so looking at who rapidly advanced during the 4 years of Carter, because they would have been the loyalists, and start to look into their backgrounds. I mean, sometimes maybe there is an expert or subject matter expert, as I call them, SMEs, that are brought in for a unique reason, but most of the cases it's because they're rewarding loyalists within the career ranks. So looking at rapid advancement and moving them out. Then you have detailees, where somebody might be in one agency but gets moved to another agency. That's another way, especially during the Carter years, that they played the game of we have a small White House staff. What they did was they planted people in agencies and then detailed them into the White House. So they had one of the biggest White House staffs, but it was all a numbers game. So finding out where the detailees were, either between agencies or into the White House. And then you also had something called the Intergovernmental Personnel Act, which is still around to this day. And what that is where people can be moved from an agency into a congressional staff, or a person from a state government or even a nonprofit can be moved into the federal government. And sometimes it's reimbursable, sometimes it's paid for by our tax dollars. And those people can also be moved out. And then, of course, you have the contractors beyond that. But the key is that when you start to look at most of the websites talking about how many people can a president deal with, they all say 4,000. It's really closer to 20,000.
20,000.
Because when you start to look at not only the people who are in the different personnel things, but you also have this massive network of advisory boards. I mean, within, let's say, HHS, where Kennedy is, there's literally like 20 or 30 department-wide advisory boards. And then you go down to the Food and Drug Administration, and there's like another 40 at that level. And then you go to Medicare, it's another 20. You go to Center for Disease Control, it's another 40. And these are all appointed by the secretary themselves, and these are people who are shaping policy. Mm-hmm. So digging out everybody who is loyal to the previous agenda is a very large task.
Yes, and you're saying there are about 20,000 people that are loyal to the previous president's policy.
Well, or in positions to support the previous president's policy. Again, let's say the chief medical officer at Walter Reed is probably not a partisan, and so they fall into that category as well. So part of it is sort of triaging that 20,000 and say, okay, who are the SMEs, subject matter experts, who because they are an expert in X, Y, or Z, and some of this might even be in each agency, they have IT people, they have facilities management people, they have procurement people. So some of these people are probably not very ideological. They just simply have been there long enough and know how to do things. Mm-hmm. And they will fall into that category. So again, it's looking at, you don't want to throw babies out with the bathwater. So it's how to look at that 20,000 very granularly. And that's where we get into, where do you find that information? Because everybody is going to be all smiles in that first 100 days, and they're going to say, welcome, welcome, welcome. And some legitimately are happy to see you, and others that smile is sort of casted on their face, and the knife is sitting in the drawer. And so how to figure that out is a great challenge.
And how did you figure that out?
Some people may know the old adage of the untouchables and basically how the FBI went into Chicago, and you had the Elliot Ness, who was the charge of, and again, there was a wonderful movie made of that. There's also a whole TV series back in the 60s. But the key is what Elliot Ness did was he went into Chicago and was told through some informants at the FBI that this person, and this person were trustworthy. And so he would sit down with those people and say, okay, who do you know that's trustworthy? And he also reached out at that time to the police academy, to younger people. But Chicago was so corrupt because of Al Capone and everything else that he had to literally create a parallel network of people who he could trust and who his inner circle could trust. And that's basically what we did in the Reagan years. We had, thankfully, during the especially from '78 election onward, there were so many whistleblowers stepping forward, especially in the defense areas and national security areas, intelligence areas, pointing the finger at just how horrible Carter was and how he was selling America down the river on so many fronts. And even agents of influence who were on the payroll of the KGB and the Cuban DGI were actually in the White House and other places. I mean, it was a horrible time. I mean, people talk about Obama and talk about Biden, but it was a nasty period of left-wing communist infiltration during the Carter years. And so a lot of these whistleblowers had come to us, kind of the way people have been coming to Grassley in the last year or so. And as part of our network back in Congress, we had a huge roster of all these whistleblowers, and we parceled them out to the incoming Reagan people, saying, Joe, Sally, and Fred blew the whistle on this part of the department in 1979. We're going to sit you down with them, and they'll tell you who else. And so literally it's, who do you trust, who do you trust, who do you trust? And then watch out for Fred, watch out for Sally, that looking at sort of the naughty and nice list out there and again, starting with people who are trustworthy, but that's a long process. And we had lots of people involved with that, from the Hill at that time, investigative journalists who also had their sources, and we were able to reach out to them and say, who's been feeding you stuff that about what Carter was doing here and there. And so because we had a good trust relationship with a lot of these investigative journalists, again, there were some conservatives back then as well, that they handed over their sources. I mean, they checked with their sources. They, Sally, can I tell Scott who you are? And so these little ripples, but it took a while. I mean, Reagan did it right. By the first part of February, the White House and the executive office of the president was completely cleaned out. I mean, we literally...
Wait. 1 month in?
1 month in.
Whoa!
Yeah, because what happened is that I set up a suite in the executive office building. I was on the first floor, and there were several empty offices, and I had all these people who are good conservatives who had worked in the campaign or worked in the transition who were waiting on their appointments. So I deputized them, and we literally, in coordination with the Secret Service, went door to door from the attic all the way to the sub-basements in the executive office building in the White House. And they opened the doors, and my people went in and said, who are you? What do you do? And in some cases, there were empty offices, and there were in one case, there was a massive printout of all of the pro-Carter community activists from around the country, and I handed that off to Eagle Forum.
Ooh.
And so we were able to gather intelligence. But the main thing was literally going door to door and saying, who are you? Who are you? Who are you? And double-checking that with our sources. And so we cleaned out, so within the first month, cleaned out the executive office of the president completely. By mid to late March, we had cleaned out the first 2 tiers of every cabinet department and major agency. So we moved fast and we moved thoroughly. And again, we're talking people walking out the door, ID badge removed, most importantly, security clearance removed, which was not done very often. And that's pre-computer, so we're able to seal their files and look into those. So one by one by one, and again, I had at that time about 20 volunteers who were helping me in addition to my regular staff. And so I call it sense of urgency, that we recognize that every moment that a person was there that shouldn't be. I mean, one good example was over at Action, actually two examples over at Action. In one case, a person, we were about to fire the person. We actually brought an emissary over from the White House, and they had at that time almost $500,000 worth of grants on their desk that they were furiously signing that had been approved under Carter. Huh. And this is like second week of March. And the person came in to fire him. They said, well, can I finish what's on my desk? I said, oh, step away from the desk. Put down the pen. And so we stopped that. Also at Action, also about the same time period, we had a person literally, again, going from top to bottom. We wanted to go to every office, and in this case, the loading dock. And on the loading dock were pallets of literally hundreds and hundreds of Saul Alinsky's book on Rules for Radicals about to be shipped out to community activists around the country. So we were able to stop that shipment on the loading dock and send it off to the mulcher, basically. And so as you start to look at these things and realize that this is the way government operates, that you have this amazing complexity, and if you're not managing by walking around and literally opening up a door and seeing who's in there, or walking to the loading dock and seeing what's being shipped out or what's being shipped in. I mean, these are all very basic things, but if you don't do them, the other side is going to keep doing what they're doing.
So you were precision weeding out all of these, all of this corruption. And we have in current day, which is why I'm having you on, because we see this in our current administration, this desire to get rid of corruption, but they're going about it a very, very different way. We saw with Doge in 2025 a complete sledgehammer, but it wasn't precision. And what you're saying is you were able to do it with precision. Now, before you sent people letters firing them. You went around to different doors. You looked at something you didn't mention, but alluded to, looking at organizational charts.
Yes, very much so.
So looking at organizational charts and also giving the whistleblowers a platform.
Very much so.
Because those whistleblowers, they were willing to stand up and risk their jobs.
Absolutely.
And so you gave them a job to then weed out the corruption.
Right, because clearly, as especially Feds for Freedom, you're working with whistleblowers, that certain whistleblowers, they may be the one person who steps forward, but they may be stepping forward on behalf of others. And so they know that other people have the same unease and concern. So that starts to ripple out from that one whistleblower. There may be 24 others that are trustworthy because they themselves are also of the same faith, so to speak, and concern. At the same time, they know who was thwarting them and caused them to whistleblow, and who was the acolyte to that thwarter. And that's so we start to build those lists. But you're right, on organization charts, the federal government is ridiculously huge. A number of years ago, I was part of a company that was working on TRICARE, and we did all the security and the international connectivity. And I did an org chart of TRICARE to show from the front line of people who are actually helping military families with their health issues, all the way up through to the secretary. 23 layers.
Wow.
23 layers. And when I went into Congress as the chief administrative officer, I had 12 layers of people, from the first person who's out there working on computers or moving furniture to my office. And I'm sitting there going, this is nuts. I mean, Walmart has 4 to 5 layers worldwide, tops, from the person who's now putting packages together for home delivery to the people in Arkansas. 4 to 5 layers.
Did you
There's
cut,
no reason to have that many layers in
and
the
did you
government.
cut your own layers as the CAO?
I was down to 2.
Wow. That's precision cutting.
Yeah, plus also because I outsourced as well as downsized and flattened, I cut my operation by 50%.
Wow.
Yeah, saving billions over time. So it can be done. I mean, that's the thing when people say, oh, it's so hard. No, it takes guts. It takes guts and precision.
And how much time? Now, you mentioned there was some cutting that happened within the first month of the administration, but for your precision cutting, how long did that take?
As we moved from the cabinet level, and again, the first and second tier cabinet level, which was about mid-March, by June of 81, we were basically down into the weeds of every major agency. And so I was then moved as a troubleshooter initially to the General Services Administration, which at that time was considered the most corrupt agency in the federal government, and there's a healthy competition for that. But it was really horrible. And again, we had a corps of whistleblowers and an incredible person, Jerry Carmen from New Hampshire. He was an owner of a number of automobile parts. He was a small businessman, but he had been a long time, going back to 76, friend and ally of Reagan. So he was put in charge, the mandate was you have 6 months to come up with a plan to clean it up or shut it down. And so I was brought in as the personnelist for GSA, and that's 34,000 employees. And what we did, again, this is all pre-computer, is we literally worked with our finance office to look at the accounting codes for all the personnel, and literally with rubber cement and poster boards, put the entire org chart, all 34,000 employees, onto these poster boards. And then we created a room, we call it the war room, and we literally had bolts in the wall, and we did a matrix. So you could say, let's look at the headquarters staff, and up would go on the wall. I mean, we're talking like a 15-foot high ceiling. And we had these wheeled ladders that we would go around so we get up high and look at the stuff, and we'd put or let's say Public Building Service, Region 3, and up would go the chart. And then what we'd do is we'd bring in the whistleblowers, and also we had literally stacks and stacks of Inspector General reports and General Accounting Office reports, and start to look at pattern analysis and say, okay, and we started literally, we had acetate rolled down and grease pencils, X's and O's, pluses and minuses. How many Inspector General reports did this one entity have? So we knew it was a rotten place, and another place might have never had an audit of any note. And then the whistleblowers came in and said, well, Fred over there, he's a bad egg. They'd pull an Inspector General report out and stuff. So we'd do these X's and O's and start to say, okay, how do we get rid of these people? Because in some cases at the SES level, you can force reassign. So we could say, well, Fred, you're really needed in Fairbanks, Alaska. And would pop them out the door. In other cases, we would what we call dry desking, where you say, Sally and Joe, there's a really important report that needs to be done, and you've got 6 months to do it, and we have this wonderful basement office for you, and you basically send them there without a telephone, and so you dry desk and just pull them off the line. And part of this is also looking at the critical paths, and goes back to the transition. We actually had a group of management experts who looked at every department and said, okay, the usual key areas is, number one, the Secretariat. The Secretariat in every department and agency is the clearinghouse for all things that go outside of the agency, whether it's to Office of Management and Budget, to the Congress, to the public, to the Federal Register, whatever. And so that's the choke point. If you want to stop something, it's in the executive sec. If you want to figure out something or reveal something, it's the executive sec. If you don't get that controlled within the first 24 hours of walking in the door, you're going to be blindsided left and right. Then you look at the other levels: personnel, procurement, the legal side, the accounting, financial side. And so each one of those offices, you have to literally have the top person and hopefully a cadre around that person looking at everything. Every day in every agency, there are dozens and dozens of meetings. Do you have one of your people sitting in on those meetings? A lot of times they're not, at which point they could be out there doing all sorts of crazy things. And the analogy I use is if you think of the ship of state and a president or an agency head takes over the pilot house. So you got this beautiful view of this huge ship, and then you realize the wheel's not hooked up and that the people in the engine room aren't yours. And so all of a sudden, you have no real control. You have a great viewpoint, but there's no control. So the challenge is, how do you get control of the engine room with your people, and how do you start to reconnect the levers and wheel to really steer the ship? And then once you've done that, just like with any large ship, you can give the wheel a spin. It's going to take 5 miles before it starts turning. So you have to recognize that you have to do things fast, do things thoroughly, and recognize that just like we are seeing today, I mean, the frontline people like at ICE and other places, you have very dedicated people. The problem is between that front line of dedicated people and the people who are sitting across from you in these meetings at headquarters.
Yes.
Because and a lot of them, in some cases, it's not big P politics where they literally are still loyal to, in this case, the Biden agenda. It can be small p bureaucrat politics. They want their turf. They're protecting their budget. They're protecting, they've spent a lifetime building a mini empire of 20 people who report to them, and all of a sudden you say, well, I can do it with 5. I'm going to slow that down. I'm going to put barrels of molasses in front of you to slow you down. So that's, again, the big P politics is one issue, but the little p politics sometimes is even worse.
That's a good point. Did Reagan specifically ask that this be done? Who was that one?
Meese.
Okay.
So Meese was put in charge of, literally, he would have cabinet meetings and had charts up on the wall saying, how much control do you have in each department? And for some of these personnel meetings, I would sit in the cabinet room as well with the whole team. The other part to the puzzle was that we also had, Stockman was looking at the budget side, but Meese was the main ramrod behind it. And the other thing is he formed something called the Cabinet Council for Management and Administration. I was part of that. And as we moved deeper into the agencies, and especially as we went into the second term and started to look at, in this case, institutionalizing the changes, because that's one of the great challenges.
Yes.
The analogy I use is a sandcastle. You can go to a beach with your kids, and you can spend all day creating this beautiful little sandcastle, but as you leave the beach, tide comes in, washes away. It's like you were never there. And unfortunately, that's the way many political people end up doing it. They create what I call the remission, but never the cure. So the other pieces to the puzzle, where you institutionalize it, on one front, clearly, all these wonderful executive orders of Trump, you want to get that codified into law.
Yeah.
But as you look into the agencies, look at their mission statements. These things are written by the bureaucrats. Look at the position descriptions for each person. Look at what they call key performance indicators that people are held accountable for in their annual assessments. Look at their training schedule. What are they being trained on? What conferences are they being sent to? That's a lot of mundane, nitty-gritty work, but until you have not only just cleaned out the riffraff and brought in or elevated good people, now you have to make sure that mission statement, which is, again, an executive function, not a congressional function, is written with full alignment to what the voters wanted. And then each position description reflects that mission statement. And then every key performance indicator and annual assessment reflects. That's a lot of work.
That is a lot of work.
And not that many people enjoy that kind of work. I mean, there was only a handful of us, even in the Reagan years, that really, I mean, I was a 20-something single. And there was a lot of times where I say, well, I'm not going to the embassy party. I'm going to go and eat cold pizza with Jerry Carmen and do more grease pencils in this war room. It takes a certain amount of dedication, a certain amount of knowledge and willing to sweat those kind of details. But if we really want to recognize that at the end of the Trump term, and hopefully many more years of Reagan, of Republican stuff after that, that if at some point the bad guys get back in, that it's going to take them years to dig it out, and in some cases not at all. I mean, one example, when we were when I was doing my chief administrative office, as we were abolishing offices, we were working with the architect of the Capitol to literally change the configuration of whole floors in like the Longworth building, so that literally if they wanted to bring something back, there's no way because there's no space anymore. And when we would remove certain entities, we would send all the furniture off to the GSA, General Services Administration, for disposal. So in one case, one of my people were at the loading dock, and they're loading up, and this person walked by and said, where's all that stuff going? I said, for disposal. He said, but what if we want to bring it back? And they said, it's not coming back.
So you were completely moving positions, and you would restructure the building so that those positions didn't even have a place anymore.
Right. Or in some cases, especially with the General Services Administration and also in Congress, we got rid of whole buildings. I mean, if we were able to get rid of enough people and we didn't need that building anymore, it goes off the inventory. It goes, the lease is gotten rid of, the building is sold or whatever. So again, you're blowing up the bridges, so to speak, or using the old conquistador, you're burning the ships so that there's no going back.
Yep. So I'm going to ask a question which I know is on everyone's mind, listening to you talk about how this was done in the 1980s. Why was this not done under the first Trump administration?
Trump's huge Achilles heel in his first term was personnel. Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, he didn't even have loyal chiefs of staff. There were leaks and undermining right in the West Wing. I mean, give you one example of just how heinous it was under Trump 1. There's a huge White House correspondence office. It's in the basement of the Eisenhower Old Executive Office building. It has several people who are on payroll, but the vast majority are volunteers. They're usually drawn from the women's federations. My mom was there for all 12 years under Reagan and Bush, because she was one of the heads of the Republican Federation in Virginia. And so you bring in all of these wonderful, dedicated women who are literally opening millions and millions of envelopes and triaging them, because like Reagan would want a selection of the more poignant letters that he himself would personally look at and answer, and the others would kind of get your standard auto-penned, thank you for your views, etc. But also that's the same place where you get the congratulations on your 100th birthday or 50th anniversary. And also these are the people who are the docents for the egg roll and the Christmas and all the rest. So it's a wonderful honor to be part of that. It wasn't until 2 years into Trump's first term that office and the people running it were no longer Obama.
Whoa, 2 years? And this is, they're responding on behalf of the president.
Mm-hmm. So right there in the very basement of the old executive office building, right across from the Oval Office and West Wing, you had Obama people on salary running the place, and the legions of dedicated of women, mostly retiree women, were Democrat Federation of Women coming in from Bethesda and D.C. itself, as opposed to Republican Federation of Women coming in from Northern Virginia and other places. So, I mean, that was just how blind they were to what,
right,
and to recognize that something even that basic. I mean, I had people literally a year in, because I still had quite a network within, especially Republican women circles, in tears saying, I worked years for W, and now, I've not been asked back. And it just was heartbreaking to not only depriving dedicated Republican and conservative women of helping out the country, but to recognize that the bad guys were still triaging those letters for Trump in this case.
So what of your plan has been put into place in the second Trump administration?
Well, Trump has certainly mastered the first and second tiers of personnel. I mean, his when you look at his cabinet and White House staff in term one, and who's now, he's got the A-team, and and he's getting amazing things done. The key is how do you take that A-team and marry it up you have the front line, like say the ICE people and now the air traffic controllers, dedicated people on the front line. You've got first tier, second tier, general counsel at HHS, all these, some incredible people. But now you have this middle area.
Yes.
And how do we make sure that the A team at the top and the dedicated frontliners are somehow connected up properly? And how much of that is clearing the gate, clearing the pathways of the bad guys who may be disconnecting things between those two, or blindsiding you about there.
Yes.
And the other part, going back to the Doge world, how do you make sure that instead of 23 layers of management, there's only 3 or 4? One of the things, because I do work a lot on corporate reform, I say take the org chart and tip it on its side. So if you take the org chart and you have the muckety-mucks at the top and the frontliners at the bottom, and you flip it on its side, all of a sudden the people interacting with the customer or the constituent or the veteran that needs benefits, they're the most important because they're the front line. They're the face. They are the person who's actually delivering the goods, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And now you say, well, how many layers of support, no longer supervision, but support is needed to make sure that frontline interaction is the best it can possibly be? And all of a sudden, 23 layers sound pretty surreal. And so you start to shrink it up. And that's what corporate America does. That's what other successful global companies do. And that's what the federal government needs to do.
Now, Trump is a businessman. He should know this. So why do you think this has not been put into place now?
Well, I think the key is that as president, there's a certain there's only so many hours in the day, even for Trump. And so you have to start delegating. And the moment that you are sitting there in the Oval Office or on the phone at the Oval Office and say, make it so, who is he on the phone with? Yeah. And let's say he's on the phone with Rubio and says, we need to do more house cleaning at the state because there's still too many pro-Hamas people and others out there. And so Rubio's got a full plate, so he turns to someone and says, make it so. And so now we're into that ripple effect of who ultimately is the one who's going to actually make that happen.
So there almost needs to be an outside task force like yourself, what you were for the Reagan administration, to take it on and go to every agency.
Well, Trump has actually over the summer, he's actually created these kind of squads within each agency, but it's mostly for the hiring coming in. We're still not talking about the clearing out.
Yes.
So Trump has, thanks to learning the lessons of the first term, has mastered the input, but we still need to be dealing with the output.
Yeah, but you look at the military, you hear again and again that the service members who were kicked out over the COVID mandates, they are not wanting to be reinstated because the same people who broke the Constitution and followed, who put out unlawful orders, who followed unlawful orders, they're still there.
Right, exactly.
So, that is not happening at all. The eyes need to be on the DOD and the intelligence realms.
Right, exactly.
Those are start there of clearing these people out so the good people actually want to be inside the government and help.
Right, because those people who got thrown off over the parapet, so to speak, because they didn't take the vax or didn't wear the mask or just simply said, hey, how about working for America for once?
Yes.
They are institutional knowledge. And to deprive America of that institutional knowledge and that loyalty is horrible. But again, we're back to it takes a certain kind of wiring of a brain to want to deal with this issue. When I was, again, doing the transition, I said people are policy. Morton Blackwell emblazons in his Leadership Foundation Institute, personnel is policy. We're all on the same page that you can have all the memos you want, all the executive orders you want, you can have all the legislation you want, where the analogy when the rubber meets the road, it's a person who is waking up every day committed to doing the right thing. And whether that is an ideological right thing in a policy position or professionally and ethically the right thing in a operational position, which can be very non-ideological. I mean, there were people we elevated at GSA who I would not want to have talked to them about gun control or other things back in the 80s, but they were dedicated professionals who wanted to make sure that every penny of that was spent on government services was spent properly. And so the same thing at GSA. I mean, at GSA we did that, but also when I was CAO, there was a number of people who, were basically blatant Democrats, but they were honest. And at some point, whether it's fixing a computer or moving furniture or procuring services, all you want is somebody who is a dedicated professional who wakes up every day and sees themselves as a steward of public trust, but more importantly, public dollars.
Yes. It's amazing to me that here we are decades later and we're going through the same thing. So humans don't necessarily change. We see this.
Yeah. Power corrupts big time. And so and I've seen this even in the conservative movement during the Reagan years, dedicated frontline activists who would give their lives for Reagan, all of a sudden they get a big office with a chandelier and 10 people reporting to them, and they go nuts. And they just become petty little potentates. And so that's one of the other great challenges is that you want to make sure that you're sitting there especially if you're in some of the older cabinet departments like Treasury and others. I mean, the beautiful rooms, been around for 100 years, and chandeliers and antiques all around you, beautiful views. But that's a foxhole. It's a pretty foxhole, but it's a foxhole that you're fighting from. If you're in places like housing and urban development, now you've got these horrible, bland kind of socialist realism architecture. I had one friend call HUD 10 stories of basements because the thing is just so dank and horrible. But the key is that you might have a fancy title, you might have a fancy office, but it's just another part of the front line. It's another foxhole to fight the good fight. And whether that fight focuses on the ideological and policy aspects or on the effective management and integrity of the system and proper stewardship of public funds and public resources, it's a front line that needs to be fought.
Yes. Wow, I could talk with you all day, Scott. This is very, very, very important work, and you've done this country a great service.
Thank you.
So thank you.
It's an honor.
I want to ask two more questions. If we are not able to clear the House in this second administration, if that does not happen, what do you think will be the result of that?
That a lot of missed opportunities. And that think of if you had a completely aligned organization at state or defense or homeland security or education department even, the things you could move faster on and broader on, but more importantly, permanently on, is light years more than if you're having to slog through because some bureaucrat who is either protecting their turf or protecting the Biden legacy is basically having that memo or report gathering dust on their desk or coming up with some obscure law or they make up a law that says, oh, you still have to do this and you still have to do that, and we have a 30-day waiting period. And a lot of these times they just make that stuff up. And I mean, a good friend of mine who was actually in the Clinton administration, he was a cabinet secretary, and we'd been friends on Congress before that. And he said, they just come in my office and out lie. And this is a Democrat, a cabinet secretary for Clinton, and they were lying to him too, because again, that small p issue versus the big P issue. And so the trust no one kind of issue, but until you have somebody verified that they're trustworthy. But yeah, the missed opportunities and how fast the other side, if they ever get back in, it's going to slingshot back.
That's right.
Snap back their way.
And it wouldn't have, so these 4 years that we have now, it wouldn't make a difference.
Especially on the executive orders, because
That's right.
Just like Trump in the first couple of days erased so many of the Biden executive orders, a person from the other extreme could erase Trump's executive orders just as fast. And unfortunately, the Democrats are far better at that than we are.
Do you want to hear something funny?
Go ahead.
Okay, so within that first day of Trump taking office, he signed an executive order that rescinded the rescission of the Biden mandate, meaning basically the mandate was back on, the COVID mandate. And so our lawyers found out about this, and they contacted us and said, oh, the rescission of the mandate was just rescinded by Trump. Basically, the mandate's on. And we're like, what? And so I started talking with some people about this, and we started to get kind of nervous and trying to contact people. And well, we found out months later, like right as we're about to start going public with this, because we weren't making headway, we found out that the day after he signed that, he actually rescinded it again. So he canceled that original executive order. But for about a 24-hour period, the Biden mandate, we think, was back on. So it must have been a mistake on somebody's end. Isn't that an interesting story?
Oh, absolutely. Well, just like right now with this whole budget battle, even if we pass a continuing resolution, it's the Biden budget, because Republicans have not passed any real budgets. Because a continuing resolution is continuing the budget priorities and budget levels of the previous existing budget, which happens to be the last Biden budget.
Interesting.
So the irony of all this is that all this fighting is basically over a Biden budget, because our side hasn't been able to get their act together to pass a Trump budget.
They need good personnel in there. Scott, they need normal human beings, normal American citizens in there.
Common sense is a huge skill.
Yes!
And a very, very rare.
If the average American citizen could do one thing to combat the corruption that we see in our country, what would it be?
Blow the whistle themselves. I mean, and it may not be corruption, just could be dysfunction and inefficiency. The next time some veteran walks into a VA hospital and gets jerked around, the next time a person's trying to get a federal permit for something and gets jerked around, the next time if a friendly contractor is getting jerked around or being asked to do things that shouldn't be done, tell somebody.
Yes.
I mean, we have, thankfully, a lot of great members of Congress and people like Grassley on the Senate side who've become a great clearinghouse for these things. We have the media. We have social media, Feds for Freedom, that you need to tell somebody about it. You need to be a Paul Revere to basically let people know that something out there is happening. And if you're encountering it, it's entirely possible that other people in other parts of the country are encountering similar dysfunctions or corruption or stupidity. And the more you pile that evidence up, especially if a pattern emerges, you now have something actionable.
Yes. Oh, Scott, this has been such a great conversation.
Same here.
On behalf of Feds for Freedom, thank you so much for coming in today and speaking with me. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe to, and share our podcasts. I'll see you next week.